Hi, good evening everyone. Welcome to July's Leeds.js. First up, I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors. Sky Betting and Gaming paid for the pizza and will be paying for our trip to the pub. Future Labs gave us the venue. They have a co-working space through there and there. So if you have any need for co-working space, come have a look at Future Labs. And .js have provided us with a discount and a conference ticket to give away. So we're giving away a conference ticket today. Follow us on social media. We have Twitter, Facebook, Google+. We're on Meetup. We're now on YouTube and we're streaming it on YouTube. This is the first time there's a Raspberry Pi in a cardboard box. And there are some stickers at the back in a little tub, so if you want to grab a sticker, grab a sticker. So we have a code of conduct. You can get the full code of conduct there. The short version is Leeds.js is dedicated to providing a harassment-free meetup experience for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, or religion. We do not tolerate harassment of conference participants in any form. Sexual language and imagery is not appropriate for any meetup venue or online discussion, including talks or the Slack channel. Leeds.js members violating these rules may be sanctioned or expelled from the group at the discretion of the group's organisers. And then, so as I mentioned, we have some discounts for conferences. So the closest one is JSConf Budapest. Disclosure, I'm speaking at it. I didn't get this because of that. I got this before that. So if you go and buy, or if you go to their website and when you're buying a ticket, if you use Leeds.js C BP17, so we tweet these out as well, so check our Twitter. And every 5 tickets that get sold with that, we get one to give away. So if you're going to go to it, please use it, and then we get one to raffle off, or to do as a prize draw. And then there's .js, which is in Paris, and then the code for that one is just Leeds.js. And yeah, as I said, we get a ticket to give away from .js. So if you want to go to .js, it's in Paris, it's the 1st of December. We literally only have a ticket to give away, not the hotel or anything like that. If you want to enter, go to tinyurl.com/leadsjs.js, which sounds redundant. And I'll be drawing at the end of this, so I'll give people a minute if they want to type it into their phones. It's very generous of them to give us a ticket to give away, and hopefully we can find more because it's conferences. That was all the things, I think. Yeah, so besides that, tonight we've got 2 talks. We've got Chad Gowler, who will be talking about mental health in the tech industry, and Martin Nyaga, is that how you say it? Good. We'll be talking about state machines in JavaScript, which at first, when he was first talking to me about it, he used the terms push-down automata, which terrified me, because I didn't do computer science and thought that as an audience of mixed sort of skill level, it might be terrifying. So first up we've got Chad. So
I just won't read the comments. It's with Macs, isn't it? They just work. Excellent. It's always the way to get people involved is to complain about computers. Hi. This is my talk, supporting mental health in agile teams, because I know this is kind of a crowd of developers, but it's not really just about developers. It's about anybody who works in a agile/scrum environment. Your designers, your product, your UXers, your what have yous. So it's a topic that's very dear to my heart. I quite like talking about it, and so I hope it it's practical and it's useful for you. So a little bit about me. I was a web developer at Sky. I've just left because I'm going to university in September to do a master's, which will be very exciting. So I've been a web developer for about 7 years now, kind of various workplaces, based in Sheffield. My pronouns are they, them, which basically just means, like, if you tweet about this, and you should, my Twitter handle is Citation at the top. It means when you say, oh, I'm at Citation's talk, they are awesome, as opposed to she is awesome, essentially what that means. Like I said, I'm Citation on Twitter, like, please tweet me, or tweet about this, or tweet me questions afterwards, or something like that. Important thing to start off with, then, is some disclaimers and content warnings. This is going to be a very heavy talk. It's not really kind of as light-hearted as some other talks that I've done. We're mostly going to be talking about depression and anxiety. This is partly because they're the most common mental disorders. I think it's something like 1 in 5 people will suffer from depression at some point in their lives. Excuse me, hay fever. But also that they're the conditions that I suffer from, and so I've kind of got more of a bank of experience to draw upon when I talk about these things. I'm also going to be talking about some ableist language, and I'll kind of cover that in that slide. If at any point you feel this is too heavy for you, or this is uncomfortable for you, and you need to kind of just pop out for a couple of minutes while I move points and move on to the next slide, that's totally fine. I'm also not a therapist. Like I said, I'm a web developer, which doesn't really qualify me to do an awful lot else. I can't give you medical advice, nor should I. If people want to talk to me about my experiences with therapy and medication, like you can do, but that's just from my experience. I can't kind of give you any concrete medical advice. I'm not a doctor. I'm also not you. And I know this kind of sounds like a weird thing to say, but I often find if I watch other people's talks about depression especially, or people say, play this game, or watch this film, or read this article about depression, and then I'll read it, and it doesn't really resonate with me, then you have that whole kind of, am I actually depressed, or am I just like making this up? Because this is very common, but we're not all going to have the same experiences in the same ways. So if not all of this resonates with you, or some of this sounds strange to you, or what have you, then that's totally okay. It's really hard to get mental health statistics, because mental health affects us differently as we go through our lives. You know, there's this 1 in 4 people at some point this year will have a mental health disorder or a mental health issue. 1 in 6 people in any given week will have a mental health issue. So you think about your team, that's at least 1 person in your team, right? Maybe 2, depending on how big you are. And also that all needs are different. There are other disorders that don't really get covered as much as things like depression and anxiety do. There's things like bipolar, like OCD, like schizophrenia, all of these kind of different disorders, ADHD. And they're all going to need different things, different forms of support that perhaps won't work for me or I don't need. Even though this is mostly going to be about myself, I did ask other people. I did a very, very small survey of people with kind of other mental health conditions, so they've kind of given me some things to talk about as well. This isn't just about me. It's unusual because most of my stuff usually is. But I got into this because I help out with a thing called Geek Mental Help Week. I've got there. Laser pointers. There's a link at the top. It's an initiative that is basically a week in October where there's like a blog, there's some events that happen. I usually do some stuff in Manchester. And yeah, there's podcasts and stuff like this. And I submitted this blog post last year, which is about there's no line in my timesheet for panic attacks. We were having a very, very tough week. Where there's this massive, like, looming deadline. It was very, very, very stressful for me. And I got to the end of the week, had to fill out my timesheet, and got very anxious about it because my timesheet was a lie. I mean, timesheets are, you know, fabrications occasionally anyway. But I was like, well, I can't say, honestly, I've done 35 hours of work on this project this week. I've done 20 hours of work, and the other hours have been panicking or crying or, you know, other stuff that's going on with me. And it got me thinking a lot about the work that we do. We tend to, especially kind of, I think, developers, think that coding is the only thing that we do, and it's the only way we add value to a team or we add value to a business. You know, that we're coders, we're code monkeys, we sit down, you know, head down, and just kind of, you know, 9 to 5, just write programs. That's not really what we do. There's loads of other things we have to do around our job, mostly based around communication, collaboration, meetings. You know, if you're in an Agile or Scrum team, you've got those kind of like ceremonies. You know, things like code reviews. There's actually loads of things to do as part of our day-to-day job. And they're the things I think I find difficult. I think the coding is fairly straightforward and it's kind of fairly pleasant to just kind of work logically through a problem and everything else in my head is kind of going to how. But it's all those other things, talking to people, communicating with people, working with people, they're the things that I find the most difficult, and they're the things I kind of want to talk about today and give some advice about. I also kind of want to start off, though, before we get into that, talking about what it is like having a mental health condition, or what I find it's like for me having mental health conditions that I do, and how they affect me on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully, if there's stuff I don't cover in here, you can kind of extrapolate it out and think about how you do stuff in your team. First of all, I'm tired all of the time. And this kind of comes on two fronts, well, kind of several fronts. First of all, I don't know if you've ever had a panic attack. It's not very pleasant. A panic attack is essentially my brain has decided I'm in mortal danger, I'm in serious physical danger, and it's this fight or flight response. So basically, I am either going to leg it or I'm going to punch somebody. I also kind of have a third panic thing, which is freeze. Essentially, my brain kind of goes a bit Jurassic Park and thinks that everyone's vision is based on movement, and if I stand very, very still, no one will see me. But it's all the same thing. My muscles will tense up, they're properly tense. Heart rate will go up. The hormones around your body will change. Your logical brain, the part of your brain that's kind of saying nothing's going to eat us, we're at work, kind of gets completely switched off. And that's really, really tiring, right? It's like going for a run. It's like going for a sprint, but I'm sat at my desk. And I can have a panic attack for an hour. I can have many panic attacks in a day, and that's very tiring. The other thing to consider is that stress is really bad for you. Not just mentally, it's also physically very bad for you. I suffer with a few autoimmune disorders, one of which is kind of like moderate to serious. And autoimmune disorders, which are kind of disorders of the immune system, are very prone to stress. So you might think, oh, it's okay, we're just going to go through crunch for a week, we're just going to go through crunch for a couple of days. But if that stress, that mental stress, translates to me having a physical flare-up, I can be suffering from that for kind of weeks or months at a time. And then that's tiring, right, because having a chronic illness is unpleasant. It's also mentally tiring. This is because, well, the work we do is mentally exhausting, right? We don't really do a lot of physical work as developers, but we do a lot of mental work. It's mentally tiring, kind of doing the jobs that we do. That takes up like a big chunk of my headspace, is like remembering how to program, actually doing some stuff, all that problem solving, all the really good fun stuff. But another part of my brain is taken up by what we call kind of emotional resilience. That my brain is constantly telling me I'm either in danger, which is anxiety, or everybody hates me, and that's a depression. And I kind of have to have a big chunk of the background process of my brain chugging along, fighting those things off, saying like, we're not in danger, nobody hates you, like all of the time. I don't really think about it consciously, but there's that big chunk of my headspace gets taken up by that. It means I don't have a lot of energy left for anything else. I've given this talk a couple of times, and people talk to me about the spoon theory a lot. You know, this idea that if you have a chronic condition, whether it's physical or mental, you have a finite amount of energy, and you have to plan that very, very, very carefully. If I go over energy, I essentially cut out. So if something happens to me that I haven't planned for, I can lose the rest of my day to kind of depression or anxiety because I don't have any room in my head left to kind of fight that stuff off anymore. It's also incredibly isolating. It's hard to talk about this stuff. Obviously, it's not that hard for me because I'm stood up in front of all of you, kind of talking about it. But in a work kind of basis, it's really hard to have that first conversation with your line manager and say, I really can't do this, or I'm struggling with what I do because of this thing that's going on in my head. We know that there's a lot of guys in the tech industry, obviously. We know that for men, obviously, things like depression, like male suicide is kind of the biggest killer of kind of men under 40, because there's a stigma against talking about it. I also find, as a queer person, and as someone who is assumed to be a woman, that I already stand out in the tech industry. I already kind of don't belong here. And then to have this kind of other thing to say, oh yeah, as well as that whole kind of gender thing I've got going on, I'm depressed. That's a really hard conversation to have. Not just the first conversation either, keeping up conversations, or what do I do when I'm actually having a panic attack at work? Who do I talk to? Trying to talk to somebody and say, genuinely freaking out over here is a really, really hard thing to do. And I know that it's common, and I said at the beginning of the talk, this is very, very common, but you don't think about it at the time, right? When you're stuck in your head, you don't think about, well, I'm in a team of 12, so at least somebody else has got to be having trouble, right? Statistically, you don't really think about that. Something that came up on the survey is open office environments, and I didn't really think about this the first time, but now I thought about it, I was like, yeah, open offices are terrible. I don't think anybody really likes open offices, apart from kind of companies who want to cram as many of us into a smaller space as possible. And the main problem with open offices is the noise, right? You've got multiple noise sources because you can, around stand-up time and you're listening to 5 other teams have their stand-up and you're trying to listen to your stand-up, and that's very difficult. For me, my anxiety is very highly triggered by this. I kind of suffer from sensory overload, in which if I have multiple noise sources to process, my brain will kind of shut down. I do sit through meetings occasionally with a hand over my ear because I'm trying to block out noise that's going on. And that does make you look a bit weird in the stand-up. And the way we deal with this is to wear headphones. Excuse me. The way we deal with this is to kind of wear headphones, and the headphones kind of the universal sign of don't talk to me, I'm working. But for me as well, so I have that, headphones on, I'm working. But sometimes, like, I've got headphones on, because if I take them off, I will have a panic attack. But I do actually want to talk to you. I want to interact with people, right? I'm quite extroverted. I like talking to people. I like working with people. And sometimes that's what I need to bring me out of a funk. But I can't do that. It's like a balancing act. It's like, if I put the headphones on, I'm depressed because I'm by myself. But if I take them off, I'm going to have a panic attack because it's too noisy in here. So you do feel very kind of isolated, kind of for your own safety, but it's still unpleasant. And then if you don't drink, it can be quite difficult. I do drink, so this doesn't really bother me so much, but a lot of people have said that they struggle because we really like alcohol in the tech industry, and a lot of meetups are like, hey, come to our meetup and get drunk, or hey, come to our conference and get drunk, or job adverts are like, hey, come work for us, get drunk. Like, we talk about this a lot. It's our Free Beer Friday. And a lot of people don't drink because it makes their condition worse, or because they're on medication which interacts with alcohol. And so you can get this reputation. I think kind of I've had this reputation before. People think I'm kind of quite cold and antisocial because I never go out with people. But I'm like, well, I don't, because maybe I'm not drinking, or like bars are bad for that whole kind of like multiple noise thing, right? It's very hard to have a conversation with somebody in a pub, necessarily. So you feel isolated from everyone because everyone's like, hey, we're going to go socialise. Like, hey, that release went out, we're going to go celebrate. And you're like, well, I don't really want to be put in that particular social situation. It's very hard. The gist of the talk really then is about, not falling over, it's about generating a kind of open and supportive and welcoming and flexible working environment. And that's a really easy thing to say. I could just say that and like walk off, be like, make your workplace open and leave it. One of the things I think people could start with is the way they use language, particularly. We say a lot of phrases like this in our day-to-day jobs. You know, we're like, oh my god, this is insane, or, you know, you're refactoring some kind of ancient piece of code and you're just like, this code is crazy, like, this is batshit, like, you know, someone will say, like, I want to do the next project in, like, Angular rather than React, and you're like, oh my god, are you mental? How could you do this? And each thing by itself is kind of fine, which is really very hard to pull people up on it, but it's not. This kind of language constantly happens, and what this does is it kind of creates this atmosphere where having a mental health issue is something bad, right? You never say, this code is crazy, and mean that in a nice way, right? You always kind of mean it in a derogatory way. You're like, this person who wrote this is obviously, like, severely unwell, so, you know, call their variable, like, I or something, I don't know. It creates that kind of environment. And kind of an example of this is a previous employer of mine. He had this big thing about all women were mental, and he used to say it a lot to everyone. He's like, all women are crazy, all women are mental. And so when I was all like, I really need to talk to you about my mental health issues, I just didn't, because that was that kind of, you know, that atmosphere that he had created in the workplace, which is unpleasant. So one thing you can do is when you go back to work tomorrow, don't say any of these words. Say probably the words you actually mean, like, I don't understand why someone would do Angular, or whatever it is. And then when other people say it, kind of pull them up on it. That'd be cool. Also think about flexibility. So when I originally did this talk, I just kind of went like, meetings, they're horrible. And then I went, code reviews, they're also horrible. I'm trying to make the talk more flexible as I'm talking about flexibility. It's all kind of working together. Because actually, when I was talking about meetings and stuff, meetings means anything from, you know, it means anything from your stand-ups, you know, your kind of ceremonies, your retros, your planning, you know, that kind of fun stuff. It also means stuff like, I think a lot of stuff that applies to meetings also applies to stuff like pairing. It applies to stuff like just kind of sitting down with a couple of devs for 10 minutes and working a problem out. We communicate a lot with each other in various different ways, including perhaps like code review. You know, these are still forms in which we communicate. And I think we could communicate better and in a more open kind of way. So to start with, think about agendas. We don't like to do agendas for meetings because we're cool, because the old industry did like agendas and minutes and all that kind of stuff. But we're the cool new industry and we don't want to be bogged down by rules. But agendas are good for allowing people to know what's going to happen. They're good for you when you're holding a meeting, because you should have goals of a meeting, right? You shouldn't just go, we're going to sit around for 2 hours and waste time. You should always kind of have a goal. But it's also important if you can do something unexpected. So an example of this might be, we had a retro a couple of months ago. I was having a very, very bad day. And I was like, well, I should go home. I was like, no, it's just the retro this afternoon. All I've got to do is write some complaints on Post-it notes, which I'm fairly good at, and then I can just give them my Post-it notes, and I can just sit in a corner. Like, I can participate, well, not participate, but I can be there, but not kind of actively participate. I'm ready to write some Post-it notes and sit in a corner. Unfortunately, the Scrum Master decided that retro was going to be more of a communication exercise type retro, or a kind of fun retro, where we had to go and talk to each other kind of one-on-one. And I wasn't prepared for that, and I freaked out, and I had to leave the retro. I basically kind of went to my line manager and went, can't do this, and left the retro, and it took me like an hour and a half to calm down. And I didn't get anything out of that retro, and I probably could have done. If he had mentioned that to me beforehand and said, this is the format the retro is going to be in today, I could have either prepared for that, or I could have said, actually, can I skip this? Which kind of leads on to my next point, that we tend to be very rigid with things like meetings, like, this happens here, and this happens here, and this happens here, and everybody has to be in this meeting for the entire meeting. Allow people to skip meetings, for whatever reason that might be. It might be that actually they're not feeling mentally up to it. It might be they've had 10 meetings that day. It might be that they don't feel they're required. Allow people to drop out of meetings if they need to. If they're struggling to I can have times where I'm right for the first half of the meeting, but as it carries on and I'm finding myself kind of falling into a lower and lower mood or getting higher and higher in panic, then I actually need to get out of a meeting halfway through. But that's a really difficult thing to do if you're the only person doing it, or if you don't have a culture that kind of allows that. So run your meetings in an agile way. Make them flexible. Think about how else people can participate. I don't have to be sat around a table in order to participate in a meeting. So at Sky, for some of our guild meetings, we do those over Hangouts, because you can't fit everybody who wants to go to the meeting inside the room that the meeting's in. I don't really want to be stood up for 2 hours, in a room kind of listening to things. I quite like that. I can just pop my headphones on and listen to a meeting over Hangouts and participate where participation is allowed. So even if you're in the same building as the meeting that's going on, think about, well, what if people can just connect to this meeting remotely? They don't have to actually be physically in the room with me. Especially if you have remote developers, because we tend to forget sometimes remote developers when we set up meetings. You kind of go, well, actually, people can be remote while still in the office, and you kind of get more into that culture. Think more about things like having a proxy. So actually, I might feel that either, well, I'm not going to be in this meeting because I'm either going to go home, or I might just not be there, I'm on holiday or something. Or I perhaps don't feel comfortable at that time talking about those things. Or I might be new to an organisation, and it takes you a while to figure out what you can and can't say in kind of certain situations when you're new, especially if you're new to the industry, it's your first kind of industry job. And on your second day, someone's like, here's a retrospective, you can complain about everything, and that's kind of quite overwhelming. So allow things like proxy, get someone else to speak on your behalf. I unfortunately have had to do this a couple of times because I know that my point will get taken more seriously if I get a man to say it for me. It's something that kind of you have to do occasionally. Think about anonymous input, when I've run retrospectives where people can send me their feedback anonymously as the person running the retro, then I read it out. So then people feel more open to say what they need to say and don't feel they have to be in the meeting talking to people using that energy and communication. So next time you have a meeting, don't just think, well, it has to be the entire team around a table for 2 hours. Just kind of think about opening that up, making that kind of more flexible. The other good thing about having an agenda then is that people can kind of go, look through the agenda and go, I only need to be here for the first half, I only need to be here for the conclusion, and people kind of work themselves out. Something that's kind of slightly against the flexibility thing is to try and cancel meetings once you've put them in the calendar. Or at least if you're going to cancel them, be very careful about it and think about doing it in advance. So the first time I was going to do this talk at work, I was panicking a little bit, so I hadn't spoken to anybody I worked with about my mental health issues, and I was like, oh my god, I'm going to come out about being depressed or whatever to all these people, and it's really scary. And I was building myself up to it all day, and then it got cancelled about 5 minutes before it was due to start because of other people's things had clashed. So basically all the energy I had that built up in preparation and kind of anticipation of this event suddenly went away. And what happens to me is if I've got headspace left over, my brain goes, hey, depression, and it totally fills that in, and I lost the rest of that day. And if you've ever gone for a big life event you've prepared for, and then the day after you have that weird empty hollow feeling, you're like we've done this, what do I do now? It's kind of like that, but kind of worse. So if you have to cancel things, just be really careful about that. Consider the fact that people's energy is a resource. It's a very important resource. We already know that kind of time is a resource because we have timesheets where we kind of say, if you say I spent 5 hours in the meeting on my timesheet, eventually somebody in finance is going to be, I can't believe we're paying for this. But energy is also a resource, even though it's kind of harder to define. Think about the fact that people don't always have the energy to be in a meeting all day. People don't have the energy to be in a meeting that's 5 hours long. People don't have the energy to communicate perhaps with people they don't know or communicate with a lot of people or what have you. So just think about those things. The other thing is to think about is reality. I'm going to go a little bit deep. Reality is broken, and what I mean by this is my perception of reality is not normal. It's not appropriate for the situation. I'm sure you've been listening to me and go why would you be worried about work? Nothing's going to eat me at work. Nothing's going to kill me at work. The building's not going to collapse. There's no lions. There's no axe murderers. Everything's fine. I know that my panic is an inappropriate response. I know that's not right. I know that depression is an inappropriate response to the situation. That's why it's a mental health disorder and not just kind of a quirk. So my perception of reality is quite different to yours, occasionally. It can be things like my anxiety as well as panic attacks, which are fun. When my brain's decided that they're too much fun and we should stop doing those, I suffer from disassociation, which means my brain essentially cuts me off from reality. The brain goes, if you're not going to listen to the panic attack, then what we're going to do is we're just going to cut your conscious brain off. And that doesn't mean like I hallucinate or anything like that, but it does mean I have difficulty processing language. But you can talk to me, and I can hear you, but I can't understand you. I go very face blind. I can talk to people that I've worked with for months, and I've forgotten what their name is, and I can't tell them apart, because the logical part of my brain is the energy going through it is so tiny, I can't process things. So even though I'm physically present, I'm not mentally present. Which is why at the end I say you should write down things happen in meetings, because just because everybody's there doesn't mean that everybody's there. That you should for people who are struggling to understand things, or everyone's forgetful as well. You should always write down. I'm not saying 4 more minutes and have a minute taker, but write down things that happen in meetings, and that's really, really useful. Remember that people are going to forget things. Periods of high stress, that stressful time I was talking about last year, and we had this looming deadline, I can't remember a lot of that. I can't remember weeks of my life because it was so stressed and my brain's just gone nope, like a trauma type thing. Code reviews. I did have a big slide about code reviews because I'm very angry about code reviews, and I could do a whole talk about how angry I am about code reviews, but I'll try not to. The thing about code reviews is they are one of the things we do that are purely textual. I know we do Slack a lot, and that's the way we communicate mostly. But I still Slack people, and then if I don't understand what they're talking about, I just go and get up and talk to them, right? And sometimes you go, actually, this conversation is really technical, and I had to point at things like in my text editor. You do those things together. But we don't tend to do that with code reviews so much. I mean, maybe you do it at your workplace. My experience has been that code reviews are things that are very textual. We're not very good at getting context from text, right? When we communicate, we use things like facial expression and tone of voice to get context, right? You can tell me I'm a very nice person that you liked my talk. But if you shout it at me and frown while you're doing it, I'm going to pay attention to the shouting and the frowning and not the actual words that you're saying, because that's how we communicate with each other. It means it is difficult in a code review to get context. It is easy for code reviews to feel overwhelming, to feel difficult, Someone is basically criticising you and criticising the work that you do. And when I'm already quite happily criticising myself in the back of my head, having someone else validate that criticism of myself can be quite difficult. Try to praise people in the code review. I was thinking about this the other day, and it's when people review movies, they don't just tell you all the bits they hated about it. They tell you the bits they liked about it, and the bits they didn't like so much about it. When we do a code review, we just tend to tell people the things we didn't like about their code. We don't tend to tell them the really cool things. So try and do that. Try and go, having that little notice on GitHub, we've got 40 comments on a pull request, there's no worse thing. If I know that at least 10 of those are people with thumbs up or saying, hey, that's a really good thing, we should put this into other projects, or we should spin this out into another ticket or whatever, that's a really cool thing to do. It makes that a little bit less overwhelming. I did work with someone who was like, oh, it should be Git, it should be called Git praise rather than Git blame. I'm like, yeah, I'm never looking up code from 2 years ago to praise them, right? But maybe we should praise each other a little bit more. The way we've traditionally dealt with this with code review guidelines, especially if you work in a very large organisation or you work in an open source type project, you have code review guidelines who say this is the behaviour we're expecting of you when you either submit some code or you review some code. And what we do is we use this phrase, which I hate more than anything else in the actual world, which is don't take it personally. Sometimes this is said nicer. I think the reviewer to the code and not you is something that Thoughtbot phrases does. Nobody in the history of humanity has ever taken something personally and then someone's gone, don't take it personally, and they've said, oh, okay then. No one's ever cheered up because you've told them to cheer up. Don't take it personally is a way for reviewers to get rid of being arseholes, is my opinion. No offence to that, exactly. I can't help taking things personally. Like I said, my reality is distorted. I occasionally can't help taking things personally, especially when we're in this medium where you're just going to criticise me. If someone's saying to you, hey, what you've said is out of order, what I've making me uncomfortable, think about ways to deal with that, just point in the code review guidelines and go, don't take it personally, Do code reviews together. I've done some great code reviews with the reviewer, and so, we've pointed at things and we've talked about things. A code review should be part of the collaboration process. It shouldn't be the thing you do at the end and then someone goes, I wouldn't have called that variable that. I'm like, well, that's great, but you didn't write it. Like I said, do a whole talk about how much I don't dislike code reviews. They have a place. They're very important. But I think we could do this process in a bit more of a friendly, humanitarian type way. Okay, I'm probably running over, but my time is a little bit broken. Quickly then, as a company, if you run your own company, I'm very sorry for you, I know it's very difficult. If you work for a bigger company, these are things you can go back to work tomorrow and suggest to them to do. The first one, mental health days. Sky allow me, when I do my self-certification, and I say I've been off sick, they allow me to say that I'm off sick because of depression or anxiety or stress. That's really, really good. It's good because it means I don't have to lie when I'm off sick. So before, I've been off sick and then gone, oh, I had a cold, or like, oh, I had a migraine or something. And then I spend my whole day at home worrying I'm going to get caught for lying. And so I don't really recover, right? It just kind of makes it worse. And then I go back to work having not recovered and everything's a big waste of time. But being able to email into work and say, having a sick day, depression today, it means I actually spend the time off really well. It means I can recover and that everyone's kind of got this good understanding of what's going on with me, and that's amazing. So kind of consider that, you know, people shouldn't work when they're sick. It doesn't really matter what the sickness is. Think about having quiet spaces in your office. I think more kind of offices are quite good at this now, but having kind of quiet rooms and quiet spaces, because working in an open office is difficult for lots of people. Allow people to work from home more often. We as an industry, we are the best industry. We're the industry that's best placed for people working from home and working remotely, and yet we're very bad at it. We're very bad at kind of properly engaging with remote developers. They allow people to work from home. For a lot of people, this helps that they can work from home if they're feeling stressed or they're feeling that they can't interact with other people today. Caveat to this is that this isn't like a cure-all. For me, in the way that kind of my depression manifests particularly, it can be very dangerous for me to be spending any time on my own. You know, like if someone's got a migraine when they're nearly blacking out, you don't send them home, right? You wait for someone to come get them, or you wait for them to kind of recover for a little bit until they're kind of in a condition to go home. So it's very tempting to go, hey, you're depressed, go home. But that doesn't really work for everybody, and you need to work with that person to make sure you're doing what's appropriate for them. Mix up your social events. It's not all about beer. If you work at a place and you know your job advert has free beer Fridays on it, go to HR and shout at them. Don't shout at them like it's the first kind of point of call, they get a bit upset. But talk to them, you know, like, girls don't want free beer Fridays, you know, we want open and supportive working environments, yeah. Do that kind of stuff. And think about on-site help. So this can be anything. This can be stuff like you want your own just kind of little mental health awareness initiatives. You want to piggyback on something like Geek Mental Health Week, or you want to do something for World Mental Health Day, you know. Have an environment where mental health is a thing that you talk about and you're always kind of constantly aware of. Have things in your kind of company intranet or whatever it is to point people to local resources, you know. These are people you can phone if you're having trouble. These are places you can go, these are people who you can talk to. It can be something a bit more formal if you're a large company especially, you know. Third-party counselling hotlines, there's lots of kind of companies that do this for corporates. Things like if your company offers healthcare, check to see if they offer therapy under their healthcare. A lot of healthcare providers don't. If they don't, try and talk to somebody and see if that's something you can get popped in. If your company doesn't provide healthcare because it's too small, consider. I haven't tried this, and I keep suggesting this in the talk, and I don't know if anyone's tried this with any success, but I genuinely believe that companies should pay for therapy if people are taking therapy for work reasons. During that stressful time, I'm working with my therapist through things that are very much me. They're not work, they're me, and kind of I'm trying to work stuff out. We came to a really good point, and I was just kind of coming to this big, not revelation, but we were trying to get to this really, really good point. The deadline hell kicked in at work, and I had to spend 4 therapy sessions talking just about work, and that's like 250 quid, which really I just wanted to come into work and build a company and be like, I was working on something really important. This cost me a lot of money, but I've had to like pay this extra money because of you in the way that this has been mismanaged. The other thing you can do is send people to become mental health first aiders. It's much like physical first aid. As a course you can do, I've got a link in the next slide. It basically teaches you how to spot when people are having a mental health crisis, what to do in that situation, when do you need to call an ambulance, when do you need to kind of carry through people's crisis plans if they had one, how do you talk people down from a panic attack, that kind of stuff. So just some resources then to finish off with quickly. Open sourcing mental health are amazing. They're based in America, they're a non-profit, which means a lot of their formal resources are very based around the American work practices and American disability laws. They aren't that useful, but the rest of the stuff on the site's really useful. There's a blog, there's a forum, there's a Slack group. Ed Finkler does a talk about open sourcing mental health. It's really, really good, and I recommend you watch it. There's Mind, which is the UK, one of the biggest UK mental health charities. They have loads of good resources on the website. They have a social network on their website for kind of peer support if you just want someone to talk to. Their local chapters are very good. I think I've not been to like Leeds Mind, but I've been to Sheffield Mind. They've been really good for me, just for getting me started, like pointing you out to people that you can talk to, or things you need to do, or helping you kind of think about the language and where you talk to your employer. And then just mental health first aid at the bottom. It's fairly cheap, I think, so have a look at that. Consider if your company will pay for you to go and do that. I want to do it, but then I'd just be first aiding myself, which might be a little bit like funky. Like if I could talk myself out of a panic attack, I wouldn't be having it in the first place. So it's not that helpful for me, but it might be helpful for you. I hope this has been kind of practical and useful. People you know in your workplace are suffering from mental health issues. You might not know it, but they are, because a lot of us are, and a lot of us will be as we go through life and as things change. And I want tech to be open and inclusive. You know, as we become a more diverse industry, we're going to have lots of people with different ways of working, different life experiences, different ways of approaching problems. And if we don't kind of make this nice and flexible now, like we're going to have hell in like 5 years and we're trying to make this all work out, you know. I want to work and I want to be productive. We all want to work and be productive, and sometimes we just need a little bit of a hand. Thank you. I don't know if you want to do questions, or if people want to ask me questions, that's grand. If not, then you can grab me afterwards, or you can, you probably won't be able to grab me afterwards because I'm not going to the pub, but you're welcome to tweet me if you've got any questions. Sorry? Sorry, I've got, my hearing's a bit now. Panic attacks, right, okay, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it's... Depression is kind of a lack of energy, I think is the best way to describe it. There's this kind of weird thing where a body's like, you need to leg it, and the depression's going, but that means we've got to move. But yeah, and it can make it hard for kind of people to know how to react to me in those kind of certain situations. I don't really know. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird paradigm. I think that's why kind of having spaces in the workplace to run away to I find quite useful. So we've kind of got like, we've got fake grass because where Sky's up at least stops. So there's kind of this fake grass outside, and being able to go and sit outside for 10 minutes is really useful. So that my brain's kind of fulfilled the we've run away, and the depression's like we've only gone outside and this is kind of okay. And having those quiet spaces, I can just kind of go into the quiet room and kind of curl up under a table for 5 minutes. Like that stuff's really, really, really helpful. So I don't have to go home. But I can still just kind of like bomb out for a little bit. I do this a lot, I don't know what it means. I hope that's helpful. Anything else? No? Awesome. Thanks again for listening. And please ask me questions if you've got any questions.
Alright, good. So I'm going to talk to you about state machines in JavaScript. And I guess I'll start with a bit about myself. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, born and raised. My background is in chemical engineering. I study at the University of Leeds, so I'm going to my final year now. But I've been writing code since 2010. I wrote my first line of code in Pascal. And then I wrote Visual Basic for 2 years after that. They're like the old Visual Basic before the .NET stuff. So it's kind of really old code. But then I got into like C++. After a few years, I got into proper web stuff, and that's kind of what stuck with me, and that's what I'm doing now. I run a team of software developers back in Kenya, where I'm from, and our day-to-day stack is kind of Ruby, Rails on the back end, and then we're doing Knockout.js and slowly moving into TypeScript stuff on the front end kind of area. And this is kind of the ceremonial slide to scare everyone into thinking I'm really smart. But we're here to talk about state machines. And I want to talk a bit about what they are and kind of just break down some of the jargon that we see here and provide some really simple examples and some really simple analogs in real life and in programming situations where you can apply this to solve real problems. And sometimes like to call state machines the fundamental model of computation, which is just a really fancy way of saying that they are effective at expressing what we do in code, which is sometimes a bit hard to explain. And really what state machines is stuff like this. It's drawing some circles and arrows and building a very simple looking system, which ends up being a very effective way to describe a really complex set of rules. And this is a simple example. And just to take a step back and think about computers themselves and what they really are and what they really do. And back when I really started working with computers, the first thing you get to learn is that a computer is literally just a black box that takes some input, flips some bits inside, and then produces some kind of output that you appreciate as a human being. But digging into what the processing of a computer really is doing, I have a clip right here which I want to show you, which will kind of set a good precedent for some of the stuff I want to talk about next. Give me a second. Just see that it's going to be quite clunky because I've got. Sorry, you can't hear, but I'll talk you through it. So he touches the resistor, this circuit on the left, and one LED goes off, and he touches the circuit on the right, and the other LED goes off. And so basically what this guy has done here is he's wired up a very simple circuit with a computer chip and stuff, and this is showing you basically 2 bits of RAM. And he applies an electric circuit to one side and one LED goes on, and he touches the electric circuit on the other side and the other LED goes on. And this is basically what a computer does at a macro scale. Just multiply this into billions and billions of times, so the gigabytes of RAM and processing power that we have now. It's basically applying electric circuits in certain ways and having the memory remember what you just did, right, by the state of the memory after the computation has been done. And so just going back to what I have here, talking through that again, the CPU will fetch some kind of instruction. Say you tell it to do 1 plus 1. That's some kind of instruction. Decode what that means, compute the result, and then place the result. This is now 2 as a state in RAM, a sequence of bits, 1s and 0s, that you appreciate as a result and you see as the answer. And kind of just breaking that down, even he was showing that a computer with 2 bits of RAM, which is literally a 1 bit of RAM kind of system, which is a simple light bulb, where when you start, the lights are off now, and then you flip the switch and the light comes on. And that's literally what you're looking at here is the simplest explanation of a state machine. It starts in the off state, you give it some kind of input, and it moves to a different state. And just to show this using the kind of imagery that I've shown you earlier, this is how you represent it, kind of using conventional state machine diagramming. And you can see, given by this arrow on the left side here, the entire system starts off in the off state. You give it a flip switch command, it moves into the on state. The on state has this double kind of circle here, and that just means that this is the result that we're looking for. This is quote unquote the accepting state. And you give it the flip switch command again, and it goes back to the off state. And literally, this is what the state is. Very simple. This kind of representation is also called directed graph, if you've heard that. I'm not going to go deep into graph theory, but it just means that you have a series of these circles called nodes, and you have edges between them, which you can follow in only one direction. So this is a very simple diagram of a directed graph. And taking that simple light bulb example and moving to something a bit more abstract, something that allows us to now take the idea and apply it to other concepts in programming. I have here a very simple state machine, very similar to what we had in the light bulb example before. And it's a machine with 2 states, and this machine takes its inputs by reading characters from a string of text. And we start in state 1, and when we read an A, we move into state 2. Read a B, move back into state 1. And state 2 is the accepting state, which means that's where we want to end up, that's where we want to be. And so taking the first example from here, we have the sequence A, B, A. I start in state 1, I read an A, I move into state 2. I read a B, I move back into state 1, I read another A, and I move into state 2, which is the accepting state, which means this is kind of the stuff I want. This is correct as a valid string of text according to the state machine defined on the left-hand side here. Trying the second example, it's exactly the same as the first, except there's a B at the end. So when I end up in the second stage after reading the third A, when I read the B, I end up back to stage 1. And stage 1 is not my accepting stage, it's not the status of I want. So we reject this as invalid input, quote unquote. And just by drawing this system with these circles and arrows and defining how you can move between one stage and the other, we effectively defined something that allows you to accept any odd length sequence of A, B characters following each other. That's quite complex, given that we've not done much here. If you were to write that in code, it would be a bit more clunky and you have to think about a lot more things. But with the diagrams here, it's quite a simple representation of something that's a bit more complex than it looks. And just to close off kind of this abstract example, I have two last strings here, which really don't follow any of the transitions in the machine. And when a machine like this sees something that it doesn't recognize, immediately rejects as invalid. And so if you have BAB, from state 1, there's no valid edge to this. There's no valid transition that allows us to use a B character. So that's not correct. And it's the same as the string 4 here. And so in the next slide, I just want to see how we can implement this kind of abstract example in JavaScript. And then that is kind of the basis of some of the more advanced examples I'm going to show as we move on. So let me just open that up real quick. All right, good. So I have here a state machine. It's already written out, but the structure of this is going to be the structure of all the state machines that we read. This is stuff that you can quickly write up yourself real quick. And in this line 4, we define the state that our system has. In this case, just the 1 and the 2. And it's defined as an object with a valid transition. So if you look at the transition, we have this state here, which means when I'm in state 1, there's a transition that allows me to read an A character and move into stage 2. That's what this means. And then state 1 is not an accepting state, and so we give that the accepting state false. And then state 2 is similar. So when I'm in state 2, I have a transition that allows me to read a B character and move back into state 1. And because state 2 was my valid accepting state, then accepting state 2. And just, in fact, for all the examples I'm going to show you, the only part that really changes is the definition of this here. You're just being able to get around to do some really complex stuff moving on. And the core of this machine is a set function here, which takes a string of input. This reset state function just says go back to the first state, which is state 1 in this case. And then split up the input into a string of characters, read the characters one after the other, and set the next state using the current character, the character that you just read. I don't know if that makes sense. So setting the next state is just about taking whatever character that you just read and figuring out if there's a transition that corresponds to reading this character and moving into the next state. And if you don't find a valid transition, if the current state has no transitions corresponding to the current character, then just return false, and the state machine is basically going to reject the input. I don't think there's much else more. Is accepting just returns whether the current state is an accepting state, and reset state just goes back to the initial state. So this is what 40 lines of code. And this is everything that we're going to need to build more complex state machines that will be able to solve more complex problems moving on. And I just want to show you this here. I'm just going to know that and say sorry, second. It's a bit hard to type from here. Let's do that. Via oh yeah, thank you for that. Alright, good, that was harder than I expected. AB machine. So machine equals to new AB machine. and then we just say machine.test. And I'll just give you some of the examples that we tested earlier. We test just AVA, and we have the machine returning true, saying that this is a valid string by the state that we just had. And then we test AVAB, and this is not valid. And again, we come back and test something like foo, and again, that's not valid. The machine returns false. Now, I'll just come back here, and let's try and develop this idea and see what kind of more advanced stuff we'll be able to do. Just before we move on to the kind of concrete stuff which is on this side, some of the applications of this in the real world, I'll just use the light bulb example, which is kind of just an analog to represent it. I also found a cool analog with a vending machine. Basically, there's only so many, if a vending machine only accepts 10p, 20p, 50p, £1 coin, that's the set of transitions that allow it to get to a certain value. So if you're trying to get to a total value of £1.10, you could define all the paths to £1.10 using that set of coins in a state machine, and that would allow you to kind of map everything that the vending machine could, every point that the vending machine could possibly be in. That makes it a bit clearer. But state machines are used extensively in design of electric circuits and kind of lower level electronic stuff. They use a lot in computational theory and modeling more complicated things in computer science theory. Some of the examples that I'm going to go through after this now, the first one of which is regular expressions of triggers. I've used regular expressions extensively in kind of day-to-day work. And the last example, which is really what led me to think a bit more about working with state machines, is around checking syntax of an expression of a string of text. They also have some use in application workflows, which I'll talk about a bit towards the end. And the first thing I want to talk about is regular expressions, which I'll just show you a quick example. So while we're here, so if I have, for example, the regular expression foo, just defined like that, I can then test foo against any kind of string to see whether that string contains the word foo. And that's what this syntax up here means. And if I test the same regular expression against something else, for example, the word bar, then it returns false because the word bar does not contain the characters. So be able to find the string foo at any point in the text. And let me show you how we can take this concept of regular expressions and try to model it using state machines and come up with something that can mimic this kind of behavior using state machines. And I'll just take you through that really quick. Why is this? There we go. So, when you type /foo/, this is conception. This could be what's happening in the background. And just imagine you have a string of text like the word football, and you're reading the characters from the font one by one. And we're going to try and use this state machine to determine whether the word football contains the characters foo. And starting from state 1, which we have started here, if we read an F, then we get moving to state 2. And this star on the left-hand side means if we read anything else not an F, then we stay in state 1, right? And state 2, same thing. If we read an O, we move into state 3. But in state 2, if we read anything else that's not an O, then we go back into state 1. State 3 is similar thing. If we read an O, we move into state 4. We read anything else that's not an O, we go back into state 1. And from state 4, we can read anything because basically we're sure that we've read the characters F, O, O following each other in a string. And so when we're in the fourth state, we can read anything really, and that will be sure that that's a correct sequence of characters. The foo has appeared. And let's just see how this works out in foo. Just using the same framework that we wrote just now for state machines, for a generic kind of state machine. And let's look at how this works in terms of foo. And the only thing that we need to change is the definition of the states. And you can see that you have state 1, which allows you to read an F and transition into state 2. The only other thing that I've introduced here is this special C other. Any other character, then you go back to state 1. And same thing for state 2. Read an O, moving to state 3. any other character, go back to state 1. State 3, read an O, move into state 4. Any other character, go back into state 1. And not much else has changed in the rest of the structure of this code, just the definition of the state and a bit of code down here and set in the next state to check for this kind of happening. But other than that, just having changed all this, then we have kind of a bare bones implementation of reggae, of a subset of reggae. Inside the tree, then we're still able to that this was a value. So that's just one example. I wouldn't be able to tell you whether it's implemented in this way, but it's just kind of a way of thinking about the problem, which is what state machines really do provide you with. It's an effective way of taking a problem and being able to model it and turning that into code eventually. Now, I just want to talk a bit about why they're called finite. And this is basically because the effectiveness of a state machine is limited to the number of states it has. So a typical problem is trying to, and this is an interesting thought exercise, is trying to design a state machine that is going to tell you whether the number of brackets in a string is balanced, the left and right side. This is kind of like a classic state machine problem to show that these things are indeed finite. So you try and build it in your head. You have state 1, you read the left bracket, you move into the second state, you read the right bracket, you move back into state 1. But if you want to be able to recognize more than just one pair of brackets, you need to keep adding state until you realize that just having, as long as the machine has a finite number of states, you're not going to be, there's a certain number of brackets that you're not going to be able to recognize anymore. And how you solve this problem is by giving the machine a bit of memory. And this, you can think of this as the same way that the computer has RAM besides the CPU. And as soon as this machine has a bit of the kind of classic computer science, you use a stack. For this kind of design, you can use a simple counter. When you do the left bracket, you add +1. When you do the right bracket, you -1. And just adding that extra bit of memory besides the state of the state machine itself allows the machine to be able to recognize to solve a more complex problem like this, which is leading me to the kind of the problem that we honestly solve with state machines and allowed us to look a bit deeper into checking that the syntax of an equation is valid. So we had this application, and it was dealing with a lot of data, doing a lot of calculations and statistics and that kind of thing, and we'd allow users to define their own relationships between the data by typing an equation. And the way those equations worked, we have simple ones from like 1 + 1, that's a really simple equation, to more complex stuff where you have T1 is some kind of measure in the application, some kind of data that is imported and has this .val property. And you want to be able to allow the user to type T1.val plus T2.val. And this is kind of a simple example. This is kind of a more complex example showing that you want them to be able to type all sorts of stuff. This is natural logarithms and more and more complex equations. And you want to give the user the freedom to be able to type this out in free form and be able to edit longer equations. And just show you this, an example pulled out from the bigger code base that has this implemented. Alright, good. So this is an equation that allows you to enter equations in free form, in the form that is just for example 1 plus 1. Then it knows, and this message updates to tell you whether the equation is valid or not. And you can see that 1 on its own is a valid equation. And if the plus changes and says, I'm waiting for some more input, this is not valid, you can save this. And maybe I use that to do 1.val, then it knows that this is a variable, and this is part of a valid equation. I can do more complex stuff times the log of 12 times 2.val. And it's able as well to give me feedback in real time if I type in the characters that are not supposed to be in the string. And even stuff like, for example, I put a right bracket there, says, no, I did not expect this. This doesn't make sense as an equation. And so this is working in real time to verify this equation. I just want to talk a bit about how we move from this just free-form string of text to understanding some more detail about it, and then being able to understand whether this is valid or not. And I'm just going to talk about a bit about how parsing a string of text like this works. And this is something that's in the realm of kind of programming languages and how compiled languages work and how compilers work and that kind of thing. But essentially, you move from a raw string of text, and then the first stage of analysis, kind of lexical analysis, which is basically figuring out, do the characters in this string of text make sense? I mean, if I'm writing an equation, I don't expect to see hashtag, question mark, $. I expect to see numbers and variable names. So that's kind of the lexical analysis part of it. So if I typed an equation like 1, 3, space 5, space 7, left bracket, right bracket, the Lexa will treat that as valid. This only looks for kind of stuff that doesn't make sense, characters that the equation should not have in the first place. The syntax analysis takes what the Lexa gives out and tries to understand, okay, this is some valid characters. Have they been put together in the right order? Are the brackets supposed where they're supposed to be? Does this thing make sense altogether? And I'll just show you the two steps. I won't look much at the lexical analysis. I'll look a bit more at the syntax analysis. But I just want to show you especially the first step so you can get a gist of what's going on as you type this equation in the input box. Does work without the dot, with the dot here. So, then I have the next one. And it does a bunch of stuff, and then the next analyze. Then it tells me whether this is a valid sequence of characters given what the Lexa is. And with that Lexa that I already have, the Lexa dot token. That's taken the string of text that we had before and kind of extracted the meaning and stripped it of white space and extracted a bit more meaning of just the string of text that we gave it. It knows that we have a number, which is 1, then we have, this is a prefix operator different from like times of division sign, because you can start an equation with just -1, but you can't just start the equation with times 1. So plus and minus are a bit different from kind of times and division. So this is a prefix operator, which is the plus, and then we have another number, which is 1. And it kind of extracts this meaning from the equation up front. But the Lexa, and I can show you some other random stuff, it doesn't know how to extract the token. It still considers this as valid, because what the Lexa is doing is it's just taking the string of text that I gave it and trying to extract and understand what each of the characters mean. So it still knows that this is valid in that there's nothing unusual here. I'm not seeing stuff that I don't expect to see. But this sequence of meaningful characters, this sequence of meaningful tokens, as you can see, this is what the syntax checker takes in and tries to understand whether this stuff has been put together in the correct order. And how it does that is using a tick machine, and that's what I want to show you just now. So there's 7 types of tokens, as we've seen that before. There's numbers, there's variables which look like this. There's function, which is just log, exponentiation, natural log. There's left bracket, right bracket, and then there's prefix operator, plus and minus, and then infix operator. Infix meaning it has to appear in between two numbers or two variables or anything for it to make sense. You can just have a times 3 and then leave it like that. So those are the infix operators, so times, division, and exponentiation again. And trying to think about how these can turn into a state machine that will be able to recognize whether the stuff is coming in the right order. This is an attempt that is going to fail, but let's go through it anyway. We start in the start state, and we know that if I'm starting an equation, I'm able to read either a number or a variable or a function. A function is log or exponentiation or whatever, or a left bracket or a prefix operator. Those are the valid things to read from the start state. And then imagine I read a number, and this starts to get a bit more complex. But after I've read a number, I can read an infix operator, which is I can do a times or a division or raised to some power, or I can read a prefix operator, which is plus or minus. And if brackets are not zero, if I've read any left brackets before, which means my brackets counter is more than 1, then I can read a right bracket, valid read a right bracket. And just this if here starts to show kind of the indirection that can happen in a state machine, which is what more of the realm of non-deterministic stuff. What we've been doing so far is more deterministic state machines. As soon as you start to have these branches, this if somewhere in between, then you have something that's non-deterministic. You can determine how this thing will go. But trying to move on from here, trying to define all possible ways that this can go and produce a valid equation, it gets pretty complex and it's a bit impossible to do it in a diagram. And so you usually produce stuff that looks like this, which is a state transition table. And going across there, that's what the previous state is. And then going down here is what the next state could be. And from the start state, I could read a left bracket, I can read a prefix operator, I can read a number, I can read a variable, I can read a function. And I'll pick another random one. Let's start with if I just read a right bracket before, then I could read another right bracket, but with the caveat that the bracket counter still has to be more than 0 for me to read 2 right brackets in a row. And then a prefix operator, I can read a plus or minus, I can read a multiplication sign, but I can't read another number, a variable, or function. And so this table here, this set of transitions, so to speak, first of all, we appreciate that this has become really complex, and it only started with about 8 which brings out a bit of a limitation of using state machines to solve problems, which is as soon as you get to about 7, 8, 9, 10, it becomes impossible to manage the series of transitions between them. But for problems that have a smaller domain, a fewer set of states and transitions, then state machines can be a really effective way of working through the problem. And so taking this and putting it into kind of like the framework that we developed earlier for building state machines. I'm not going to attempt to go through all the code. I'll just kind of show you how this fits in, and then wrap up with a few last examples. And this is broken. There's a problem with Microsoft. Yep, exactly. Okay, while that is opening, I'll come here and I'll look for the syntax checker. And I'll just close this all together. And show you this. So, the tokens, the only thing that it takes in as input is the tokens from the lecture. And you can see that now, on top of just having our states, we have a counter that's going to be incremented every time we read the left bracket and decremented every time we read the right bracket, just to keep things sane in check. But other than that, the definition of the states is pretty much what we've been doing recently, only that the states are not numbers, the states have names. But it defines the valid transitions just as we did before. And because this is non-deterministic and the valid states could change at runtime, this is a function rather than just an object, which builds the states and returns those when the function is called. And I'll just give you an example of the right bracket. You can see in the valid transition here, it can move to a prefix operator or an infix operator, but if brackets are into a 0, then we also add a right bracket as the set of valid states that we can move into. And so with just those few changes, I think I'll jump into the here and try and show you a few examples. Checker. I have my Alexa.token up here, and I'll just say new checker with the current Alexa, and I say check whether this is valid, and it says no, this is not valid because we didn't expect to see a left bracket immediately after 1, and that's the message you get down here. Do not expect to see left bracket in time. I'll try this as one valid example and show you how this can work. And so you go back to the Alexa and give it, for example, just 1 plus 1, and then analyze that, and then this now says we give it the same thing, which says that this is valid, this message is a valid equation, which is now some of the feedback that you were seeing in the user interface earlier. And just to give you an idea of the kind of scope of the scale sorting that we're using this at. Where were we? We had just looked at the Alexa. The syntax checker, sorry. Just to give you an idea of the kind of scale that we're using here. These are the kinds of equations that the application has to parse and understand whether this all happens at runtime. Now, a big chunk of this is automatically generated by various tools, but the people who are going to use this need to have the ability to edit this equation anywhere in between, and we still need to have the sanity of knowing that whatever comes out of this front-end component is something that makes sense. And just to give you again an idea of the kind of complexity that this involves is that each of these, especially the ones which have converted at the end, each of those is its own definition of an equation of similar size. And so it's kind of like a recursive thing that gets really messy, but once you have this state machine in place, this can scale to whatever level, and without having to make too many changes. Although when this gets to the back end, it's completely expanded into the original form, which produces some very interesting problems as time goes by. But just to wrap things up, I've given an example in regex, I've given some examples in simple math, and those are problems that people have solved. The library is existing to do this, and these are problems that people have solved before. But just like we had in the application, you meet some circumstances where you need to kind of push right beyond what's available out there. You need to develop something custom. Maybe you're doing some custom language processing or something of the sort. And state machines, I think, can be really useful in such a scenario. Another scenario which I haven't explored here because honestly I don't have much experience with it myself, but I have had people speak about using state machines in that context, is sort of higher level application logic. So for example, the example that comes to my head is kind of like an inventory management system where you have a product which is available in an inventory, then someone purchases it, and it needs to become unavailable, but it's not shipped yet. So it's kind of in a pending state in between, and then it gets shipped. And so now it's in this state where it's kind of in the shipping process until it finally arrives to the customer. And this kind of moving in between states, and if you find yourself storing a status in the database, then perhaps you could benefit from modeling out your application as a set of states with allowable transitions, and trying to understand how the data kind of moves from one state to another. And that could bring out some really interesting relationships between the data. And I think that's the last thing. Well, the last thing I want to talk about is some JavaScript libraries available. The first one is called JavaScript State Machine, which is quite simple and it's for smaller scale applications like what I've just shown you. Machina.js is a lot more advanced and probably is a good one, especially if you're going to do heavy mathematical analysis and more scientific stuff. But JavaScript State Machine is nice and approachable, especially to solve simpler problems. And I think there's supposed to be screenshots here. So I think that's all I've got. I don't know if you have any questions, comments, insights. Yeah, sure. Interesting. I honestly would not be able to give you a straight answer to that problem. The simplest kind of thing that comes to my head about recursion is how we had that thing that was sending things back to state 1 the whole time, and even in state 1 you kind of just loop over yourself. But I wouldn't be able to give you a flat answer in terms of kind of recursion in the classical way. Probably there's some things out there that
So yeah, it's